The sea stretched endlessly in all directions, a mirror of deep blue shimmering under the late December sun. The cruise ship, a towering marvel of modern engineering, glided effortlessly across the calm waters, its white hull gleaming in the afternoon light. On board, the atmosphere was lively yet relaxed, as passengers strolled through its expansive decks, enjoying the final moments of their journey. It was December 27, 2015, and for many, this trip was a celebration, a fleeting escape from the routine of their lives. Sarah Robinson stood in her cabin on the 7th floor, her reflection caught in the large mirror by the bed. She adjusted the hem of her dress, smoothing out invisible creases with the palm of her hand. The day had been perfect, filled with the indulgence of fine dining, sunbathing by the pool, and endless laughter shared with her boyfriend and her parents. This vacation was her parents' gift to her and her boyfriend, a way of bringing the family closer together before the rush of the new year. The cabin felt cozy but elegant, the gentle sway of the ship a constant reminder of the vastness of the ocean around them. Outside the balcony doors, the horizon was painted with the golden hues of sunset, promising a serene night. Tonight would be their last dinner aboard the ship before they returned to the Florida port in the morning. It was a bittersweet realization, one that Sarah chose to push aside as she added the final touches to her appearance. There would be time for goodbyes tomorrow, but tonight was meant for enjoyment. The plan was simple: dinner at the ship's grand buffet restaurant. The 10th floor dining area was renowned for its spectacular array of dishes, a feast of flavors from around the world. Sarah's parents had spoken enthusiastically about it since the beginning of the trip, and tonight they intended to make the most of the experience. Sarah felt a sense of eager anticipation, imagining the laughter and conversation they would share over the decadent spread. She glanced at the small clock on the bedside table, noting the time. It was nearly 6 in the evening. The restaurant was filling quickly by now, and her parents would be waiting in the hallway. Sarah grabbed her clutch, its silver clasp catching the light as she snapped it shut. She stepped toward the door, where her boyfriend stood waiting, adjusting the cuff of his shirt. They exchanged a silent nod, the unspoken excitement mirrored in their expressions. The corridor outside the cabin was bustling with activity as other passengers made their way to evening events. Sarah led the way, her boyfriend following closely behind, as they exited their deck and joined her parents in the hallway. Her father checked his watch, murmuring something about wanting to secure a good table. Sarah smiled, gesturing toward the stairwell that would lead them to the restaurant. As they ascended the carpeted steps, the hum of distant conversation grew louder. The 10th floor was alive with the energy of passengers gathering for dinner, the aromas of roasted meats and freshly baked bread wafting through the air. The entrance to the restaurant was just ahead. Its grand double doors opened to reveal a glimpse of opulent chandeliers and tables adorned with crisp white linens. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement, her pace quickening as she approached. The group moved past the elevators situated near the entrance to the dining area. The sleek steel doors reflected the soft glow of overhead lights, and passengers waited patiently for their rides to various floors. Sarah's gaze momentarily shifted to one of the large windows lining the corridor. The ocean outside was a tranquil expanse, the sky now dimming as the last rays of sunlight faded into the horizon. She paused briefly, her senses catching something unusual. It was faint at first, almost indistinct, a rhythmic patter that seemed out of place against the background noise of the ship. Sarah tilted her head slightly, listening more intently. It sounded like rain, the gentle splatter of droplets against a hard surface. Yet the sky outside was clear, no sign of storm clouds or weather that could explain the sound. She felt a fleeting sense of curiosity, the kind that often comes when something ordinary feels slightly off. Turning back toward her parents and boyfriend, she noticed their expressions mirrored her own puzzlement. The sound persisted, faint but steady, as they continued their approach to the restaurant. Sarah dismissed it as one of the many noises inherent to a ship of this size, her thoughts quickly returning to the dinner ahead. The lights of the restaurant grew brighter as they neared, the scent of spices and roasted delicacies becoming more pronounced. The promise of good food and warm conversation filled Sarah with a sense of contentment. Behind her, The faint sound of the mysterious patter still lingered, unnoticed by most, lost in the lively atmosphere of the ship. The corridor leading to the restaurant was a lively intersection of people and activity, with passengers strolling toward their destinations, some pausing to glance at decorations or chat in small groups. Sarah led the way, her steps deliberate as she wove through the clusters of guests with her parents and boyfriend following close behind. The path to the restaurant required them to cross a small lobby near the elevators, a common area bustling with the sound of muted conversation, the hum of machinery, and the occasional clink of glasses from the nearby bar. As they approached the elevator bank, Sarah became aware of the unusual sound again. This time it was louder, distinct enough to draw her focus. The rhythmic tapping was steady and persistent, resembling the familiar sound of rain hitting a hard surface. She instinctively glanced toward the windows lining the corridor, searching for any sign of bad weather. The ocean beyond was calm, the horizon still faintly illuminated by the remnants of twilight. The sky remained clear, free of clouds or any indication of rain. The sound didn't belong. It seemed to echo faintly, not localized but diffused, as though it emanated from somewhere nearby yet nowhere specific. Sarah's pace slowed slightly as her curiosity grew. The noise didn't match the surroundings, an oddity amid the controlled and polished environment of the ship. It created a subtle dissonance, enough to plant a seed of unease. She glanced back briefly, catching her family's attention, but their expressions remained casual, their thoughts still anchored to the dinner ahead. The soft light of the chandeliers above cast a warm glow across the polished floor. The air was tinged with the mingling scents of freshly baked bread and savory dishes wafting from the restaurant just ahead. The contrast between the inviting atmosphere and the strange sound lingered in Sarah's mind as she continued walking. The noise persisted, punctuating the otherwise cheerful ambience of the evening. The elevator doors gleamed under the ambient light, their metallic surfaces smooth and spotless. A few passengers stood nearby, waiting for the arrival of the next car. The hum of the ship's engines resonated faintly through the walls, a constant undercurrent of sound that was both comforting and easy to ignore. It wasn't unusual for the ship to produce various noises, the natural byproduct of its immense size and constant operation. Yet this sound felt different, its irregular rhythm and tone subtly out of place. Sarah's attention shifted as they passed the elevators, her gaze briefly following the line of the ceiling toward the restaurant's entrance. The open doors revealed a welcoming scene. Tables adorned with elegant centerpieces, waitstaff gliding gracefully between guests, and the soft murmur of conversation blending with the faint clinking of utensils. The setting radiated warmth and indulgence, promising a memorable conclusion to their trip. As they moved closer, the sound that had caught Sarah's attention earlier seemed to grow louder, as though following them. It was persistent now, distinct and impossible to ignore. It merged oddly with the noise of the lobby, creating an unnatural backdrop to the vibrant energy around them. Sarah stole another glance toward the windows, her brow furrowing slightly as she confirmed once again that the sky remained clear. The rational part of her mind dismissed it as a mechanical quirk, an innocuous noise generated by the ship's infrastructure. But the part of her attuned to detail couldn't let it go. The air grew warmer as they neared the restaurant's entrance, the temperature subtly elevated by the presence of more guests gathered inside. The golden hues of the interior lights spilled into the corridor, drawing Sarah forward. She allowed the sound to fade into the background of her thoughts, attributing it to one of the ship's many unexplained oddities. The anticipation of dinner, of one last night spent celebrating with her family, was enough to pull her focus back to the moment. The scene ahead was vibrant, a snapshot of joyous indulgence, as passengers leaned into their tables, their faces lit with laughter and the glow of the overhead lights. Servers carried trays laden with delicacies, their movements smooth and practiced. The gentle clatter of dishes punctuated the rhythmic hum of conversation, a symphony of life aboard a ship at sea. Sarah reached the threshold of the restaurant, her thoughts drifting away from the sound that had briefly occupied her attention. Behind her, the faint tapping noise continued, unnoticed by most in the lively crowd. It persisted like a quiet whisper, threading through the sounds of the ship, its source hidden somewhere within the gleaming steel and polished walls. The elevators stood still, their doors closed, reflecting the warm glow of the corridor lights. The air in the corridor seemed to shift, a subtle change that drew Sarah's attention once more to the sound she had dismissed moments ago. It continued, an insistent tapping that felt as though it were amplifying, spreading through the polished surfaces of the ship. It wasn't just the sound of rain. It carried a strange, irregular quality, almost like something dripping steadily and without rhythm. It was enough to make Sarah hesitate as she stepped closer to the restaurant, her curiosity overtaking her momentary relief at reaching their destination. The passengers near the elevators appeared oblivious, their conversations unbroken as they waited for the next car to arrive. The hum of the ship's engines provided a steady background, punctuated now and then by laughter or the soft shuffle of footsteps on the carpeted floor. Yet, amid the lively atmosphere, the tapping sound persisted, setting itself apart from the ordinary noises of the ship. Sarah turned slightly, her gaze sweeping back toward the elevators, drawn to the origin of the sound. Her family moved past her toward the restaurant's open doors, their attention fixed on the promise of the evening ahead. The golden light spilling from the dining area seemed to form a boundary between the warmth of human interaction and the cold, clinical sterility of the elevator bank behind her. It happened suddenly. A scream shattered the hum of conversation, piercing the corridor and halting movement as if the very air had been frozen in place. It came from a woman standing near the elevators, her face pale and her hands trembling as she pointed toward the closed elevator doors. The sound of her voice echoed off the walls, a raw and visceral note that rippled through the crowd like a physical force. Heads turned, eyes widened, and the cheerful atmosphere dissipated instantly, replaced by confusion and unease. Passengers near the woman backed away instinctively, their expressions ranging from alarm to morbid curiosity. The scream seemed to carry with it an unspoken command to stop and pay attention, forcing everyone within earshot to turn toward its source. Sarah felt her heart quicken as she froze in place, the tapping sound she had noticed earlier now fully consuming her awareness. It was louder now, impossibly so, and seemed to come from the elevator doors themselves. The woman's trembling form was a stark contrast to the polished surroundings. Her hands were raised as if to shield herself from an invisible force, her eyes wide with terror as she backed away from the elevator. The tapping sound grew heavier, its rhythm broken and chaotic, and for the first time, it seemed accompanied by something more. A faint splattering noise, subtle yet unmistakable. The passengers closest to the elevators exchanged nervous glances, some stepping closer to investigate while others recoiled. One man leaned in, his head tilting as if he were straining to hear or see what had caused the woman's reaction. He took a step forward, his movements hesitant and deliberate, as though afraid of what he might discover. His pause was brief, his posture stiffening as he quickly stepped back, shaking his head and gesturing for others to stay away. The faint splattering sound continued, resonating in the now silent corridor. All eyes were on the elevator doors, their smooth metallic surface glinting under the overhead lights. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a steady trickle that seemed to seep into the heavy silence. It was then that Sarah noticed it. A thin, dark streak slowly spreading along the edge of the elevator doors, trailing downward in uneven lines. The streak caught the light as it moved, its deep crimson hue unmistakable. It spread like an ominous thread unraveling from an unseen source, weaving patterns along the elevator's reflective surface. The sight of it seemed to pull the air from the corridor, leaving behind a suffocating stillness as passengers collectively held their breath. The dark liquid gathered at the base of the doors, pooling on the floor in a way that made Sarah's stomach turn. The woman who had screamed clutched at her chest, her breathing shallow and erratic as she stumbled backward into the crowd. A low murmur spread through the onlookers, an uneasy wave of whispered speculation and fear that filled the void left by her scream. No one moved toward the elevator now. The faint trickle of liquid and the growing pull beneath the doors created an invisible barrier that no one dared to cross. Sarah felt rooted in place, her legs heavy as if weighted down by the oppressive atmosphere. Her senses seemed sharper, Every detail of the scene etched vividly into her mind. The pool of liquid at the elevator's base grew larger, its surface reflecting the glow of the lights above. The passengers closest to the scene began retreating slowly, their faces pale and their movements cautious. The air was thick with unspoken dread, the kind that grips a crowd when confronted with the unknown. No one had an explanation, no answers for the horrifying sight unfolding before them. The steady trickle from the elevator continued unabated, a macabre counterpoint to the silence that enveloped the corridor. Somewhere beyond the crowd, the restaurant's warmth and light felt impossibly distant, as though it belonged to another world entirely. Earlier that evening, several floors below the 10th floor restaurant, the ship's chief electrician, Jose Sandeloezo, prepared for what should have been a routine maintenance task. Jose, a man in his 60s with decades of experience in his field, was known for his efficiency and dedication. He carried a small toolkit in one hand and a clipboard in the other as he approached the bank of elevators that required his attention. The task was simple: routine adjustments to ensure the elevators operated smoothly. The elevators were critical to the ship's operations, ferrying passengers between its many levels with speed and reliability. Any disruption in their functionality could cause significant delays and inconvenience, especially during peak hours like dinner service. For this reason, Jose and his fellow electricians had developed a method to perform quick repairs without shutting the elevators down entirely. It was a shortcut, unorthodox but effective, and it allowed them to keep the ship running smoothly without inconveniencing guests. The official protocol dictated that an elevator must be fully powered down before any work was performed in the shaft. This involved locking the car in place, cutting its power, and securing the area to prevent accidental activation. However, this process was time-consuming and disruptive, requiring elevators to be out of service for extended periods. To avoid this, the electricians often relied on their instincts and experience, timing their repairs to avoid the active movement of the elevator cars. Jose had performed similar tasks countless times without incident. He approached the designated elevator, verified its current position on a lower floor, and used his tools to pry open a small access panel. Once inside the shaft, he climbed onto the top of the elevator car, which was stationed several levels below the 10th floor. The confined space was dimly lit, the walls lined with cables and mechanisms that powered the elevator's operation. The air was cool and slightly metallic, carrying the faint hum of machinery. Jose crouched on the elevator car, his hands deftly working to adjust a component in the shaft. The task required precision but was otherwise straightforward. He had no reason to believe this night would be any different from the countless others he had spent ensuring the ship systems remained functional. Above him, the narrow opening of the access panel framed the faint glow of the corridor lights, his only connection to the bustling life of the ship. Unbeknownst to Jose, a passenger entered the elevator on a lower floor and pressed the button for the 10th floor. The quiet chime of the car's activation was muffled by the walls of the shaft, lost amid the ambient noise of the ship. Within moments, the elevator car lurched into motion, its mechanisms engaging with a mechanical precision that belied the human error unfolding within. Jose felt the sudden shift beneath him, a slight vibration that signaled the car's ascent. Panic surged through him as he realized what was happening. He scrambled to locate the access panel, the only exit from the shaft, but the elevator's movement had already covered it. The walls of the shaft closed in around him as the car ascended, the confined space becoming an inescapable trap. Instinct took over as Jose attempted to maneuver to the side, searching for any space that might offer a chance of escape. The gap between the elevator car and the shaft walls was impossibly narrow, leaving him with nowhere to go. His movements became frantic as the car continued its climb, each passing second reducing the space between him and the top of the shaft. The machinery hummed with relentless efficiency, oblivious to the human life caught in its path. Jose's breaths came in short, panicked gasps as he struggled against the inevitability of his situation. The shaft walls seemed to press closer, the confined space amplifying his fear. He attempted to press himself against the side, but the car's movement left no room for error. His tools clattered to the floor of the shaft as he fought to find a way out. As the car neared the 10th floor, the space above it disappeared entirely, leaving no margin for survival. The crushing impact was swift and final, the powerful mechanisms of the elevator designed to operate without pause or hesitation. The confined space that had once been a workplace for routine maintenance became a scene of unimaginable destruction. The elevator reached its destination, its doors opening smoothly to reveal the bright, bustling corridor of the 10th floor. The guest who had summoned the elevator stepped out, oblivious to the events that had just unfolded within the shaft. Beneath the car, Jose's body remained trapped, his life ending in the relentless machinery that had once been his responsibility to maintain. The ship systems continued their seamless operation, unaware of the tragedy that had occurred. Above, the faint sound of dripping echoed through the shaft, a byproduct of the devastating accident. It traveled upward, its rhythmic cadence reaching the ears of those gathered in the corridor above, carrying with it the first hints of the horror that was yet to be discovered. The elevator shaft, now a silent witness to the catastrophic event, carried its dreadful aftermath upward. The rhythmic dripping of blood from Jose's injuries cascaded through the narrow confines of the shaft, traveling toward the upper levels where the evening's serenity remained unbroken. The mechanism of the elevator, efficient and unfeeling, had resumed its regular operation, ferrying passengers between floors without pause. As the elevator ascended to the 10th floor, the residual aftermath of the accident began to manifest visibly. Blood, seeping through the car's base and pooling at the doors, followed the relentless pull of gravity, its path marked by streaks along the smooth interior walls of the shaft. The sound of its descent mimicked rain, faint and steady, merging eerily with the hum of the ship's machinery. On the 10th floor, passengers had already begun gathering in the corridor, their focus on the evening ahead. Many were headed to the same restaurant as Sarah and her family, their minds occupied by thoughts of food and companionship. The vibrant energy of the ship's upper levels contrasted starkly with the grim scene unfolding within the hidden mechanisms of the elevator. Unaware of the growing tension, Sarah lingered near the restaurant's entrance, her attention drawn once more to the sound she had dismissed earlier. It seemed louder now, its cadence irregular, and it carried a weight that she could not place. She glanced toward the elevator bank, the gleaming doors standing in silent defiance of the chaos hidden within. The scene around her shifted as the woman's scream pierced the air, the sound drawing every eye and silencing every conversation. The crowd near the elevators hesitated, caught between curiosity and an instinctive desire to retreat. The woman who had screamed stepped back, her hand covering her mouth as she pointed toward the elevator doors. Her movements were shaky, her fear palpable. Those closest to her turned their attention toward the doors, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror as they registered what she had seen. Blood had begun to pool at the base of the elevator doors, seeping through the narrow gaps in slow, deliberate streams. The polished metal reflected the dim corridor lights, amplifying the contrast between its sterile surface and the dark crimson liquid that now marred it. The sight of it brought a hushed stillness over the gathering crowd, the air thick with unspoken dread. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, their movements tentative as they edged closer to the elevator. The growing pool of blood was a stark and undeniable indication that something terrible had happened. The once lively corridor was now a scene of escalating fear and confusion, the festive atmosphere shattered by the grim reality unfolding before them. Among the onlookers, a few passengers stepped forward, their curiosity outweighing their caution. They peered at the elevator doors, their faces pale as they absorbed the magnitude of what they were seeing. One man crouched near the growing pool, his hand hesitating midair as if considering whether to touch it. He pulled back quickly, his face contorted in shock, and backed away from the scene. The sound of dripping continued, each faint splash reverberating through the tense silence. It was a sound that defied explanation, its origin a mystery that loomed heavily over the crowd. The passengers, now fully aware of the blood pooling before them, began to murmur among themselves, their voices low and strained. Speculation filled the air, but no one dared voice their thoughts too loudly. The ship's staff, alerted by the commotion, arrived moments later, their expressions a mixture of professionalism and unease. A uniformed officer moved to the front of the crowd, his posture authoritative but visibly tense. He raised a hand, signaling the passengers to step back and give space. The crowd obliged reluctantly, their movements slow as they struggled to tear their gaze away from the horrifying scene. The officer crouched near the elevator doors, his eyes narrowing as he examined the blood pooling on the floor. He spoke briefly into his radio, his tone calm but urgent, summoning additional assistance. Behind him, another member of the crew attempted to reassure the passengers, though their words seemed hollow against the weight of the situation. The elevator doors remained closed, a silent barrier between the passengers and the truth of what lay beyond. The blood continued to seep outward, its steady spread a grim testament to the tragedy hidden within the shaft. The officer, now joined by a second crew member, began discussing the next steps, their voices low and measured as they worked to piece together the unfolding crisis. The corridor, once filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, was now heavy with tension. The festive lights of the restaurant flickered faintly in the distance, their warmth a stark contrast to the cold reality that had taken hold. The passengers, their evening plans forgotten, stood in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the elevator doors as the full weight of the moment settled over them. The medics arrived with hurried steps, their faces set in expressions of focus and determination. The corridor, once filled with vibrant energy and anticipation, now bore an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint shuffle of feet and the distant hum of the ship's engines. The passengers, pushed back from the elevator bank by crew members, stood in clusters, their hushed murmurs a faint backdrop to the grim work about to unfold. The lead medic crouched near the elevator doors, his gloved hand reaching toward the growing pool of blood. He pulled back almost immediately, signaling to his team to prepare for a more invasive inspection of the shaft. Another crew member, dressed in a maintenance uniform, arrived carrying a set of tools, his demeanor visibly shaken but resolute. The elevator needed to be manually opened, a task that required precision and care given the circumstances. The ship's security team maintained a tight perimeter around the area, their presence a stark reminder of the seriousness of the situation. Passengers continued to gather at a distance, their expressions ranging from morbid curiosity to visible distress. Whispers rippled through the crowd, speculations and half-formed theories passed from one person to the next, each more dramatic than the last. Yet no one had any clear answers, only the dreadful certainty that something terrible had happened. The maintenance worker began his task, his hands trembling slightly as he pried open the elevator doors with a specialized tool. The metallic screech of the doors parting sent a shiver through the onlookers, the sound cutting through the heavy air like a blade. As the gap widened, the dark interior of the shaft came into view, its shadowy depths revealing the source of the horror. The medics leaned in, their flashlights illuminating the space inside. The beam of light caught the twisted remains of the elevator's inner workings, and just beneath the base of the car, the fragmented remains of a body were partially visible. Blood coated the surrounding surfaces, a grotesque tapestry of crimson that spoke to the violence of the accident. The shaft was a claustrophobic space, its narrow confines amplifying the stark reality of what had occurred. One of the medics signaled to the others, their movements quick and practiced as they prepared to retrieve the remains. Despite their professionalism, a heavy pall hung over their actions, a grim acknowledgement of the impossibility of their task. The scene within the elevator shaft left little doubt about the outcome, and yet, there was a somber duty to bring closure to the incident. The passengers, unable to see the specifics of the scene from their vantage point, continued to whisper among themselves, their collective anxiety growing with each passing moment. The smell of antiseptic and cleaning agents soon filled the air as additional crew members arrived to assist with containment and cleanup. A member of the ship's management team stepped forward, their voice calm but firm as they addressed the crowd, instructing them to return to their cabins or continue with their evening plans. Many passengers hesitated, their curiosity outweighing their desire to leave, but the presence of security personnel eventually compelled them to disperse. Sarah lingered near the edge of the crowd, her thoughts racing as she tried to make sense of what she had witnessed. The image of the blood pooling at the elevator doors was seared into her mind, an indelible mark that she couldn't shake. She watched as the crew worked methodically, their efficiency a stark contrast to the chaos she felt within. The reality of the tragedy began to settle over her, a heavy weight that pressed down with each passing moment. The medics finally emerged from the shaft, their expressions grim as they carried a stretcher bearing what little could be recovered. A black tarp covered the remains, shielding the passengers from the full extent of the horror. The sight of it sent a ripple of unease through the crowd, even as they moved farther away from the scene. The crew quickly escorted the stretcher out of view, their movements swift and deliberate, as though hoping to erase the memory of the tragedy as quickly as possible. The maintenance worker remained behind, working to seal the elevator doors and secure the area. A cleaning crew moved in, their task to sanitize the space and restore some semblance of normalcy to the corridor. The blood, once a vivid and horrifying presence, was methodically scrubbed away, leaving only faint traces that would soon vanish entirely. Yet, for those who had witnessed the events, the memory would remain etched in their minds. As the corridor gradually emptied, the festive atmosphere of the ship felt irreparably altered. The warm glow of the restaurant lights now seemed hollow, their brightness unable to dispel the shadow cast by the tragedy. The ship staff worked diligently to maintain order, their actions a necessary facade of control in the face of chaos. For those who had gathered in that corridor, the night would be remembered not for its celebration, but for the grim reality that had unfolded behind the elevator's closed doors. The aftermath of the accident cast a long shadow over the ship, its once lively corridors now subdued and tense. Word of the tragedy spread quickly among the passengers, whispers of speculation and fragments of detail, exchanged over dinner tables and quiet conversations. For many, the reality of what had occurred was difficult to grasp, an unsettling reminder of the fragility hidden beneath the ship's polished veneer of luxury. Sarah sat with her family at their table in the restaurant, but the mood had shifted dramatically. The anticipation and excitement they had felt earlier were replaced by an uncomfortable silence. The faint murmur of other diners filled the space, their subdued tones mirroring the unease that seemed to permeate the air. Plates sat untouched, the aromas of the grand buffet unnoticed as thoughts lingered on the grim events of the evening. Her mind replayed the events leading up to the scream, the faint tapping sound she had noticed and dismissed, and the horrifying realization that followed. The sight of the blood pooling at the elevator doors was etched into her memory, a stark and vivid image she couldn't seem to shake. She wondered how she could have mistaken it for something so ordinary as rain, a thought that filled her with a mix of guilt and disbelief. The crew worked tirelessly to contain the impact of the incident, their professionalism evident in the way they managed the aftermath. Cleaning crews sanitized the affected area, erasing the physical traces of what had happened, while staff members moved through the ship, reassuring passengers and encouraging them to continue with their evening plans. Announcements over the ship's intercom maintained a calm, measured tone, offering updates that revealed little about the true nature of the tragedy. Despite their efforts, the atmosphere aboard the ship was irrevocably altered. The hum of conversation that had once filled the corridors now carried an edge of caution, as if everyone were speaking in hushed tones out of respect for what had occurred. The laughter and music that had defined the earlier evenings of the trip were noticeably absent, replaced by a quiet that felt heavy and oppressive. Sarah's thoughts drifted to the man at the center of the tragedy, the unseen electrician whose life had ended so abruptly and violently. She imagined him working diligently in the elevator shaft, unaware of the danger that was about to unfold. The thought of his final moments, trapped and helpless, sent a shiver through her. She wondered about his family, whether they knew he was aboard the ship, and how they would come to learn of his death. The weight of the loss felt personal, even though she had never known him. Passengers who had been in the corridor at the time of the scream shared their versions of the event in whispered fragments. Each retelling added a layer of detail, painting a fuller picture of the horror that had unfolded. Some described the scream, others the sight of the blood, and a few spoke of the medics and their grim task of retrieving the remains. The story took on a life of its own, growing and evolving with each telling, becoming a shared experience that bound those who had witnessed it. For the ship's crew, the tragedy was a stark reminder of the risks inherent in their work. The electricians who had developed the unofficial procedure for elevator maintenance now faced the sobering consequences of their shortcut. Conversations among the staff carried an air of somber reflection, as they grappled with the knowledge that one of their own had paid the ultimate price. Safety protocols, once seen as burdensome and inconvenient, were now viewed through a lens of necessity and urgency. The elevator bank remained closed for the remainder of the journey, a silent memorial to the events of the evening. Yellow caution tape stretched across the area, a stark visual barrier that kept passengers at a distance. Crew members stationed nearby answered questions with polite efficiency, their rehearsed responses offering little insight into the details of what had occurred. The tape and the closed elevators became a focal point for passing passengers, a physical reminder of the fragility hidden beneath the surface of the ship's operations. As the ship continued its journey toward the Florida port, life on board gradually resumed its rhythm. Passengers returned to their activities, though the shadow of the tragedy lingered in subtle ways. Conversations avoided the topic, yet it hung in the air, unspoken but present. The music played softly, the laughter more muted, as if the ship itself was mourning the loss of one of its crew. Sarah remained lost in thought as the evening wore on, the events replaying in her mind with unrelenting clarity. She found herself watching the faces of those around her, searching for signs that they, too, were grappling with the same emotions. The tragedy had left an indelible mark, not only on her but on everyone aboard the ship, a shared experience that would remain with them long after the journey ended. As the night deepened, the ship continued its steady course across the calm ocean, the stars above a silent witness to the lives below. The faint vibrations of the ship's engines were a reminder of its resilience, a testament to its ability to carry on despite the weight of what had occurred. Yet, for those who had been there, the memory of that evening would remain, a somber echo of the fragile line between routine and tragedy. The sun rose over the horizon as the cruise ship approached the Florida port, its shimmering light casting long shadows across the deck. The passengers, now preparing to disembark, moved with subdued energy, their usual excitement for the end of a trip tempered by the lingering weight of the previous night's tragedy. Conversations were hushed, their tones measured as if an unspoken rule dictated the mood. Laughter was rare, and when it did break the silence, it faded quickly, swallowed by the oppressive air that hung over the ship. For the crew, the hours following the incident had been a blur of activity. The ship's management had worked tirelessly to ensure the remaining time on board passed without further disruption. Teams coordinated efforts to clean, secure, and restore the affected areas, while maintaining a facade of normalcy for the passengers. However, beneath the surface, the tragedy had left its mark, an undeniable reminder of the fragility of human life in the face of even the most routine tasks. As the passengers lined up to disembark, many found their eyes drawn toward the elevator bank that remained cordoned off. The yellow caution tape fluttered lightly in the breeze from the ship's ventilation system, its presence a stark visual reminder of the event. Crew members stood nearby, answering questions from curious onlookers while ensuring no one crossed the makeshift barrier. The elevators, once symbols of convenience and efficiency, now carried an unspoken aura of foreboding. Sarah and her family stood in the line, their luggage neatly stacked beside them. The usual chatter of departure plans and reflections on the trip was absent, replaced by a heavy silence that none of them seemed eager to break. Sarah's gaze drifted toward the caution tape, her thoughts replaying the moments that had unfolded before her eyes. She could still hear the scream that had shattered the evening, still see the blood pooling beneath the elevator doors. The images were vivid, etched into her memory with a permanence that felt both surreal and inescapable. She wondered about the man who had lost his life, the electrician whose work had ended in such unimaginable tragedy. His name had been announced briefly during the captain's formal acknowledgement of the incident, a gesture of respect that had done little to fill the void left by his death. She pictured his family, the devastating phone call they must have received, the unbearable grief that would follow. The thought weighed heavily on her, a reminder of the countless untold stories that intersected in moments of loss. Around her, other passengers seemed to carry similar burdens. Their faces bore traces of exhaustion and unease, their movements lacking the usual vigor of travelers eager to return home. The ship's staff moved efficiently through the crowd, guiding passengers toward the gangway and offering polite reassurances to those who lingered near the cordoned-off elevators. Yet even their professionalism could not fully mask the gravity of the situation. As the line inched forward, Sarah's father broke the silence with a quiet observation about the weather. The comment, though mundane, served as a tentative step toward normalcy. Her mother nodded in agreement, offering a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sarah's boyfriend adjusted the strap on his bag, his expression unreadable as he stared at the deck beneath his feet. The conversation faltered, the weight of the unspoken pressing down on them once more. When it was finally their turn to disembark, Sarah stepped onto the gangway with a sense of relief tempered by unease. The Florida air was warm and humid, a stark contrast to the cool, climate-controlled interior of the ship. She inhaled deeply, the familiar scent of salt water mingling with the faint aroma of diesel fuel from the port. The bustling activity of the terminal offered a reprieve from the somber atmosphere on board. Yet the memory of the tragedy lingered, refusing to be left behind. In the days that followed, news of the accident spread beyond the confines of the ship. Headlines detailed the events with varying degrees of accuracy, their stark language capturing the essence of what had transpired, but failing to convey the full weight of the experience. Investigations were launched, safety protocols scrutinized, and statements issued by the cruise line expressing condolences to the electrician's family and promises to review operational procedures. For those who had been aboard, however, the words felt distant, unable to encapsulate the reality of what they had witnessed. Sarah found herself reflecting on the trip with a mix of emotions. The joy and connection she had shared with her family during the earlier days now felt overshadowed by the events of that final evening. Yet she couldn't deny the lessons the experience had imparted. A heightened awareness of the fragility of life, the importance of vigilance, and the profound impact of small decisions. The tragedy had left an indelible mark on her, shaping her perspective in ways she had yet to fully understand. The cruise ship, now docked and empty, loomed quietly at the port, its grandeur diminished by the weight of what it had carried. Crews worked methodically to prepare it for its next voyage, their actions precise and deliberate. The cordoned-off elevator bank remained a silent testament to the events that had unfolded, a reminder of the cost of cutting corners and the importance of human life amid the machinery of modern convenience. The ship would sail again, its decks filled with new passengers and fresh memories. But for those who had been there that night, it would forever be a vessel of tragedy and reflection.